I'm Mark Dawson from the Self-Publishing Show, and this is Self-Publishing Spotlight, where we shine a light on the indie authors who are changing the world of publishing, one book at a time.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Spotlight. We meet indie authors at all stages of their careers and ask them a series of 5 questions. 5 questions about their process, their mistakes and their successes. 5 answers that will help you level up your own author career. My name's Tom Ashford and I'm part of the Self-Publishing Formula. Don't forget that you can get your self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. This week's guest is Justin Bell. He's written about 30 books in the post-apocalyptic thriller and sci-fi genres, and he lives in New Hampshire. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So would you like to start by maybe talking us through the different sort of books and genres that you write in? Because 30 is, quite a lot.
Sure, yeah. Basically, what I've really cut my teeth on lately is the post-apocalyptic genre. I've been fortunate enough to be connected with another indie publisher called Moana Press, and I've been working alongside them for a couple of years, and with a real focus in post-apocalyptic. And we've been able to put together, a very nice kind of process of releasing books more or less monthly. I've been doing this close to 2 years now. Really kind of nailing down the genre and getting these books out there. We're right in kind of short burst series, so to speak, typically 6 or 8 books at a time. Try to tell a good story that fits within those 6 or 8 books, and with a real beginning and a middle and an end. Nice. And really pretty tightly targeted to the post-apocalyptic genre, and have been doing pretty well with it, all told.
Cool. Okay. Well, if we jump into the questions, the first one is, why do you write? So was there a particular story that you wanted to tell in the first place? Had you always wanted to be a writer?
I've always wanted to be a writer. I was one of those fortunate kids who grew up in the 1980s and was pretty much inundated by, pop culture media for, as long as I can remember. I had a single mom and she worked a lot, so I spent a lot of time kind of consuming media and being, familiar with sort of pop culture stuff. And what really spoke to me was the characters and the stories. And I always dreamed of kind of having an opportunity to tell some of the stories of some of my favorite characters. And interestingly, that was kind of my first introduction to self-publishing, is through the Kindle Worlds platform, which allowed you to sort of take, existing properties and write for those properties and kind of leverage some licensed universes to tell your stories. And that was sort of where I first came up with got into the self-publishing world. But for as long as I can remember, I've been a fan of telling stories. And, I majored in English in college way too many years ago to talk about. So for a long time, it's been really what I've wanted to do and what I love doing.
Yeah. And what sort of, which genre did you start off with?
Well, as far as Kindle Worlds goes, there was a selection of different properties, and so technically it was kind of it would be military action. I wrote for the G.I. Joe Real American Hero universe and kind of wrote some stories that aligned with some of those characters, which was more or less military thrillers, that sort of genre. From there, I wrote my first kind of my own property in probably 2014. I was doing an experiment for NaNoWriMo that year, and actually ended up writing my first, my first self-owned story, which in that case was sort of military thriller with a little element of sci-fi in it. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth, was on the military thriller side of things. Nice. Which actually does end up dovetailing pretty nicely into post-apocalyptic, which was kind of a good transition for me.
Yeah, nice. So are you entirely self-published, or have you got any sort of traditional publishing deals going on?
Entirely self-published, either through myself or through the collaborator I work with at Moana. We've, it's all stuff we publish on our own. Yeah. Nothing traditional. I did, when I first wrote my that thriller in 2014, I did what so many others do and spent, close to a year to a year and a half trying to solicit literary agents, trying to find somebody that might want to publish the story, and, didn't have a whole lot of luck. So thankfully, kind of coming out of that, I discovered Mark's course and decided to take the ball into my own hands.
Yeah. Would you ever switch, do you think, if somebody came along with a contract?
It'd have to be a pretty good contract. I'm doing fairly well. What I'm doing now, I think a lot of independent publishers would find a traditional deal appealing. There's as much as I hate to admit it, there's still this perception out there in the world that if you're not publishing for a traditional publisher, you're not a quote unquote real author. You're kind of, taking a shortcut, so to speak. And I hate that. But it would have to be a very good deal, because I can spend a month, writing a 100,000 word novel and make a decent amount of money, probably a lot more than I would make even with an advance through a traditional publisher. So it would really have to knock my socks off.
Yeah, fair. Okay, well, question number 2 is, how do you write? So do you tend to plot your stories out, or do you just see where they take you?
I am a meticulous outliner, but so I do write careful plots, both kind of individually based and series based. Since we do write in sort of 6 or 8 book series, I tend to outline both. However, I will say that probably about halfway through each individual novel, and also part of the way through the series, a lot of times those outlines go out the window. I do kind of let things build organically. I try to give myself a framework to work in, but as I'm going on, invariably things change. And I've had entire series kind of by book 3 completely, dovetail into something else, completely, take a hard left turn, and all of a sudden it's becoming something else. So I do plots, I do outline, but I reserve the right to completely change my mind in the middle if I want to.
Yeah. And what sort of software do you use in terms of things like Scrivener, Word, Vellum, that sort of thing?
I use a little bit of everything. I've kind of stuck my toes in a lot of different pools, hoping to find the perfect solution. I haven't found the perfect one yet. I currently use actually an online platform called Dabble, which I do like quite a bit. It allows kind of you to sketch out a scene by scene outline, and then click into each one of those individual scenes and flesh out the actual full chapter or full scene, and kind of put it all together and export it to a Word doc. So that's what I'm using now. It's not perfect, but it does fairly well. I have used Scrivener. I've enjoyed Scrivener a lot. I wish it was cloud hosted, as I think a lot of people do. But so there's a lot of different things I use. I think for finalizing the draft, it's all done in Word. I export it to a Word doc. It goes to the editor and to beta readers through the Beta Books platform. And then, once they all make their recommendations, then I put those changes back into Word. So Word kind of lives underneath the covers in almost every stage, but I use a bunch of different platforms on top of it.
Yeah. And is there a particular time and place that you like writing?
Whenever I can do it. I do have a full-time day job still. I'm doing pretty well in this stage of my indie author career, but not quite well enough. So I get up about 5 o'clock in the morning, or sometimes earlier, and spend a good 60 to 90 minutes writing then. Whenever I can get a lunch break during the workday, I pretty much always am writing during that particular lunch break. I'm fortunate that I work in IT, so I pretty much always have a computer on hand, have a keyboard at my fingertips. So I'll do it during lunch breaks, and then after family time at night, I typically stay up until 11 o'clock or midnight doing writing then. So pretty much filling in whichever cracks I can find, I'm filling in with the writing.
Cool. And well, you sort of answered this a little bit, but question number 3 is, are you a full-time author? If you are, how did you get there? And if you aren't, what steps are you taking to make it happen?
Yeah, and no, I'm not yet, but I am working to make that happen. I've set a goal with my wife right now, hopefully within the next 2 years, to make that happen. I'm in an interesting position right now. It's a little bit of a difficult position because I'm making enough money as an author where I can't really slow down or stop, but I'm not making enough money as an author to leave my day job. So as a result, I'm kind of almost doing 2 full-time jobs simultaneously. So it's definitely a challenge, and will be a challenge for the next couple of years. But we're taking advantage of the extra income to try to pay down some debt, and hoping within the next couple of years have a lot of that debt paid off. So if I do leave my day job and become a full-time author, I can weather the storm. As we all know, selling books is not a 100% reliable experience. So yeah. I want to put myself and my family in the position where we can absorb a couple down months or 6 down months if we need to. So we're working to pay down some of that debt and to get into a more stable financial place, where I don't have to feel like I need to continue making 6 figures a year in order to maintain what I'm doing. Yeah,
fair. Okay, well, question number 4 is, what mistakes do you think you've made, and what have you got right?
You name them, I've made them. The first novel I did in 2014, I wrote what I wanted to write. I kind of just, threw some words together, and it's something I actually am still pretty proud of, but I designed my own cover. I had friends and families editing it and kind of being my beta readers, even people that didn't really know the genre, they were kind enough to offer to read it for me, even though it wasn't something that was really in their wheelhouse. So as a result, there were some structural issues, there were some grammar issues. The cover I made was something I was very proud of at the time, but looking back at it now, was certainly not professionally designed. That I think I learned a lot of my mistakes kind of with that first novel. And unfortunately, I kind of wish I had discovered Mark's course maybe about a year earlier, because I'd actually published 2 novels in my original trilogy before I discovered his course, and kind of changed my tact a little bit for the third one. But, by then it was almost too late. So yeah, I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes. As far as getting right, I've been really, really fortunate to be able to connect with Melanic Press and Mike Krause and do some work in the post-apocalyptic space. And, it was kind of my writing work that, got me introduced to him and enabled me to do that. And really, it's about genre targeting as far as the post-apocalyptic world goes, is knowing your audience and kind of giving the audience what they expect and what they want. Keeping things, interesting, of course, but, also finding that genre that you know what the audience is looking for, but it's still something you enjoy writing. Because I know a lot of the perception out there is if you're trying to write to an audience or write to it, you've somehow got to sacrifice some of your creativity. And that's really not the case. You've just got to find that sweet spot that allows you to be creative and tell the story you want to tell, but that also appeals to the right audience or appeals to the core audience in the right way. So I think what I've gotten right really is kind of learning how to find that middle ground between stories I want to tell and stories I think readers will want to read, and being able to tell those stories and having readers enjoy them and having it, show up well in the KDP reports at the end of the month.
Yeah, it can be a tricky balance.
Yeah.
So question number 5 is, what's your final piece of advice for authors starting out in indie publishing?
Really, it's don't expect to be a blockbuster seller your first time out. It's a long, slow road. I think I'm doing fairly well, and it's still something I've been doing for several years, and will be doing for several years more to get where I want to be. So don't write your book and throw it out there and just expect to suddenly be able to retire. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And as much as you go through Mark's course and kind of hear stuff you don't want to hear, like you've got to be a marketer, you got to create a newsletter list, you got to do all this stuff. A lot of authors kind of say, well, I probably don't have to do that. I can find my own way to do it. But I would say just listen to the experts, listen to the professionals, take your time, and most of all, just keep writing. I mean, without the book, you're not going to be able to find an audience to sell to. So you need to keep writing, and you will get better the more you write. So if you write a book, it doesn't get a good response, doesn't get good reviews, just sit your butt down and write another one. And, you'll get better as time goes on. It's just kind of, you're never going to be perfect your first time out. So it's like anything else, just keep on writing and keep on producing. Yeah,
that's good advice. And unlike in traditional publishing sort of world, writing a bad book or making some mistakes with covers and things like that is not going to kill your career.
Exactly.
If people don't like it, you just write another one and hope that one is better targeted or just better written or better marketed or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, it's my first trilogy that I wrote is kind of a perfect example of that, because I think there were some significant mistakes that I made. I've gone back and I've paid for some new covers, so I have plans to relaunch that and to tweak it and to get it back out in the world, hopefully with a better response. So that's the beautiful thing about independent publishing, is that you can do stuff like that. If something didn't hit right, you can kind of analyze that and kind of see where you missed and do it again. Do it right. With all the new things you've learned.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's it. That's your 5 questions. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been great to have you here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. It's been great talking to you.
That's it for this week's Self-Publishing Spotlight. Don't forget that you can get your free self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. And if you want to appear as a guest on this show, send us brief details about yourself and your writing at selfpublishingformula.com/spotlight-guest. I'm Tom Ashford, and I'll see you again next week.